I want you to start by just holding a very specific number in your head for a moment.
Okay.
$220 million.
Oh,
Just let the sheer scale of that figure sit with you.
it's a massive amount of money.
It is staggering. And now I want you to imagine that entire sum, which is your taxpayer money, by the way, being deployed for a single national advertising campaign.
That's a single campaign. Yeah.
Right. And that staggering figure is the exact reason why just 2 days ago, on March 3, 2026, the Senate Judiciary Committee basically erupted.
Erupted is probably the best word for it.
Yeah, into one of the most explosive bipartisan oversight hearings we have seen in recent memory. I mean, lawmakers from across the entire political spectrum were demanding to know where every single dollar of that money actually went.
And, when you are dealing with a sum that massive, the questions surrounding the actual mechanics of how it was spent become equally massive. The paper trail alone on something like this is just staggering.
Which is exactly the maze we are navigating for you today. We have a really fascinating stack of source material driving this deep dive, anchored by an incredibly detailed piece titled Accountability and the $220 million DHS advertising campaign.
And that was written by Eric Reinhardt, right?
Yes, Eric Reinhardt, who goes by Jazz. He is a former military leader and the founder of an organization called Truth Matters. So our mission today is to unpack the intricate logistical details of these government contracts, analyze the messaging of the campaign itself, and really explore the broader fundamental questions this raises about the stewardship of your public funds.
And just to set the ground rules for you today, because we are dealing with a sitting cabinet official and highly charged political hearings involving the current administration, it is crucial to state that we are not taking any political sides.
Absolutely not.
Nor are we endorsing any of the viewpoints presented. Our sole purpose is to impartially convey the facts, the ideas, and the concerns exactly as they are laid out in our source material. We just want to give you the information you need to understand this national debate.
Exactly. So let's step into the room. It's March 3. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is sitting before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, you might normally expect a hearing like this to fracture along typical party lines.
Right, that's the standard Washington script.
But the atmosphere described in the reporting is completely different. You have Democrats and Republicans united in this intense, highly skeptical line of questioning regarding DHS's decisions.
And the unity in that room is a really critical detail because the hearing wasn't primarily focused on debating the underlying policy itself, which is normally where those partisan splits happen.
Right.
The core of the issue was the actual structure and execution of the campaign. DHS launched this initiative with a very specific stated objective. It was a direct national television and digital message warning undocumented immigrants to voluntarily return to their home countries or face severe enforcement consequences.
And a nationwide blitz of that scale requires a highly calculated aesthetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the visual rhetoric of this specific campaign became a massive focal point for the committee.
The imagery was definitely front and center.
Because one of the most widely circulated advertisements doesn't just feature, generic government narration. It features Secretary Noem herself.
Personally delivering the message.
Yes, she's depicted riding a horse near Mount Rushmore. The imagery is heavy with sweeping camera angles, dramatic lighting, and symbolic visuals of American power, integrating architectural imagery tied directly to the current administration.
And when you analyze visual rhetoric at that level of production, you also have to look at what is intentionally left out of the frame.
That's a great point.
Based on the source, observers and lawmakers immediately pointed out a distinct lack of broad American demographics in these national broadcasts.
Yeah, they were very specific about that.
They were. Critics highlighted the total absence of Native Americans, African Americans, or Hispanic individuals in the public-facing ads. The campaign was just visually monolithic.
And Reinhardt notes that the campaign's defenders argued it was designed to deliver a specific policy warning, not to serve as a demographic mirror of the entire country.
Which is their stated defense, yeah.
But those visual choices still became a absolute lightning rod for criticism, essentially pouring fuel on an already tense hearing.
Which forces us to look at the immense symbolic weight of government communication. When you are operating at the cabinet level, the way a message is delivered carries just as much institutional weight as the text of the message itself.
Totally.
But the fundamental question that lawmakers kept returning to, the thing that really drove that bipartisan outrage, was the decision to make the secretary the central figure of the ads. The committee was basically asking, should a multi-million-dollar taxpayer-funded national ad campaign serve as a prominent feature vehicle for the sitting cabinet official who is in charge of running it.
Yet for several members of Congress, positioning the secretary at the absolute center of the messaging crossed a definitive line between a public service announcement and taxpayer-funded self-promotion.
Right.
But it's one thing to debate the optics of a cabinet secretary riding a horse on television. The committee's outrage shifted entirely from the television screen to the ledger when they realized how that airtime was actually purchased.
And that is where it gets really interesting.
The money trail is where the scrutiny goes from a debate about aesthetics into overdrive.
Because to understand the gravity of the committee's reaction, you have to look at how anomalous this situation really is. You already know how standard federal procurement is supposed to work.
Oh yeah, full and open competition.
Exactly. Full competition, mountains of red tape to ensure fairness, transparency, and value for the taxpayer. So how did DHS bypass all of that standard infrastructure for a massive television buy?
How did they do it?
They pulled the non-competitive emergency justification ripcord.
Let's pause on that.
Yeah.
Because an emergency justification implies a sudden, unforeseen crisis, right? Like a hurricane or a sudden threat to national security.
Yeah, imminent threat.
So how does an agency use an emergency bypass, which is designed to prevent imminent harm, to fund a highly produced, heavily scripted television and digital advertising blitz?
That is the exact friction point the Judiciary Committee was hammering on. By issuing these advertising contracts under a non-competitive emergency justification, DHS legally sidestepped the traditional bidding process.
Right.
They designated the public messaging as an urgent, critical necessity, and that allowed them to move vast sums of money at an incredibly accelerated pace without waiting for competing agencies to submit proposals.
And the pace at which that money moved leads us directly to the $143 million question.
The big one.
Because of the $220 million total budget for this campaign, approximately $143 million was routed to a single primary beneficiary, a Delaware-based company called Safe America Media.
And the timeline of Safe America Media's involvement is what methodically laid the groundwork for the sheer shock we saw from lawmakers.
And unbelievable.
Safe America Media did not exist as a corporate entity before this specific contract opportunity materialized.
They didn't exist.
No. The company was incorporated mere days before the solicitation for the work was actually issued.
Wait, logistically, how does that even function?
That's what the Senate wanted to know.
How does a company incorporated on a Tuesday even have the administrative and banking infrastructure set up to legally accept a $143 million federal contract by Friday?
It defies standard logic.
You are talking about a brand new entity formed out of thin air, landing a 9-figure federal media buy practically overnight. Just imagine the unlikelihood of that.
The logistics are staggering, and that is precisely why the committee was demanding answers.
Yeah.
You have a newly minted LLC tasked with managing hundreds of millions in public funds.
Which brings us to the second major red flag raised in the hearing.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. Safe America Media had absolutely zero prior federal contracting history.
None.
None. There is no track record of them executing complex national media buys, no history of managing federal compliance, and no past performance reviews. So you were taking $143 million of the listeners' tax money and handing it to a company that a week prior didn't even exist on paper.
Right.
It completely makes sense why senators from both parties were immediately scrutinizing this. They wanted to know if any appropriate procurement safeguards were actually followed, or if the emergency designation was just used to bulldoze through the normal vetting process.
And the structural weirdness of the financial trail doesn't stop at the primary contract. The hearing also zeroed in on a secondary layer of the financial ecosystem involving subcontracting.
Right, the subcontractors.
Because when a primary contractor gets a massive award, they frequently hire subcontractors to execute specific pieces of the work. In this case, a political media firm called Strategy Group received subcontracted work tied to the advertising effort.
This is where the oversight gets incredibly granular and, frankly, deeply concerning for the committee. Because the scrutiny of Strategy Group quickly uncovered a direct marital tie that brought massive conflict of interest questions right into the spotlight.
The connection is impossible to ignore.
The CEO of Strategy Group is a man named Ben Yoho, and he is married to Tricia McLaughlin.
And until very recently, Tricia McLaughlin served as the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs and the Chief Spokesperson for DHS.
She was literally running the exact office responsible for managing these communications initiatives.
Exactly.
The spouse of the top communications official at the agency awarding the contract ends up leading the firm that gets a piece of the subcontracted work.
And that proximity to the power center of the agency is why the Oversight Committee is treating this as a critical failure of institutional safeguards. When you have an emergency justification bypassing the normal vetting process, and you end up with a massive contract flowing down to the spouse of the department's chief spokesperson, the appearance of a conflict of interest is just overwhelming.
I mean, the lawmakers were basically asking what firewalls, if any, were actually in place to prevent internal influence over these financial decisions.
Right. Now, during the Senate hearing, Secretary Noem did offer a defense regarding this specific web of contractors. She explicitly told lawmakers on the record that she did not personally select the contractors or subcontractors involved in the campaign.
So she's claiming a degree of separation.
Yes, maintaining a stance of distance from the granular procurement decisions. And it is an important procedural distinction. Reinhart's analysis clearly notes that, at present, no formal legal finding of wrongdoing has been issued.
But the committee wasn't really buying the plausible deniability.
No, not at all. The intertwined relationships, the days-old incorporation of the primary vendor, bypassing standard bidding, all of these elements are now the absolute central focus of congressional oversight.
It is an incredibly dense web to untangle. We are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, opaque corporate structures in Delaware, emergency loopholes, high-level political marriages.
It's a lot.
It is. And when you get bogged down in the mechanics of Washington procurement, it can start to feel a little abstract, right? It just becomes numbers on a spreadsheet.
Which is exactly where Eric Jazz Reinhardt's perspective becomes so vital to this deep dive.
Yes, because he takes this massive, convoluted government process and grounds it in a very human, very rigid reality.
His perspective is essential here because he completely shifts the analytical framework. He moves the conversation away from just the political maneuvering and focuses entirely on the core concept of institutional duty.
Jazz Reinhardt isn't a Washington insider. He is a United States Air Force veteran who retired as a technical sergeant.
And a highly decorated one.
Yes, during his service, he was named Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year for both his base and his wing. That is an incredibly high standard of performance.
It really is.
And he makes it clear that recognition of the military doesn't come from publicity stunts or, riding horses on camera. It comes from doing the actual grueling job, leading airmen, managing limited resources, and taking absolute accountability for the mission.
And accountability is the absolute anchor of Reinhardt's entire philosophy. He synthesizes a standard from his military service that he feels is entirely absent in the civilian government situation.
How does he frame it?
In the military, accountability is not a buzzword. It is not optional. It is the absolute foundation of leadership. You are taught from day one that every single piece of equipment and every single dollar in your operational budget ultimately belongs to the American people. You are merely the steward of those resources.
And Reinhardt makes sure we know exactly who he means when he talks about the American people. He shares his own deeply personal, relatable post-military struggles to ground that staggering $220 million figure in everyday reality.
Because it wasn't easy for him after he got out.
No. Like many veterans transitioning to civilian life, he had to start completely over. He describes a period where he survived financially by working the floor, selling women's shoes during the day, and then grinding as a DJ at night just to make ends meet.
That is a profound contrast to the imagery of a cabinet secretary utilizing a multi-million-dollar production to project power.
It really is. It strips away the polished aesthetic and reveals the actual human cost of those funds.
It completely reframes the money.
Reinhardt points out that there is zero shame in honest, exhausting work. But those experiences fundamentally change how you view government waste. When you struggle to stretch a paycheck, you understand something that he feels is entirely forgotten by the people signing off on nine-figure emergency contracts. Taxpayer money is sacred.
It is not a limitless resource to be deployed at the discretion of a department head without rigorous oversight.
Exactly. He passionately lists the ordinary citizens who are the true source of that $220 million.
Right.
He reminds us that this money doesn't materialize out of thin air. It is extracted from the labor of the waitress working a double shift.
Right.
It is pulled from the paycheck of the mechanic turning wrenches all day. It comes from the small business owner, from families balancing their monthly bills, and from the young volunteers serving in the military.
When you frame the expenditure through the lens of those individuals, a massive, non-competitive contract awarded to a 3-day-old company isn't just a bureaucratic anomaly,
Right.
it is a direct violation of public trust. Reinhart is highlighting a powerful, ultimate takeaway here. Public office is not a stage, it is a duty.
Public office is not a stage, it is a duty.
And the natural extension of that duty is his unyielding point about responsibility. In the military environment Reinhart operated in, the standard is simple. If you are entrusted with responsibility, you must be accountable for the outcome.
With no exceptions.
Exactly. If millions of dollars are mismanaged under your command, you don't get to claim you didn't personally select the vendor, you own the failure. He carried that strict standard as a technical sergeant, and he argues the American taxpayer deserves nothing less from cabinet officials.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We stepped inside an explosive oversight hearing regarding a $220 million DHS advertising campaign. We unpacked the controversy over a cabinet secretary utilizing taxpayer funds for prominent self-placement.
We dug into the emergency authorities.
And the logistical absurdity of Safe America Media getting a $143 million contract days after incorporating. Plus, the deeply concerning marital ties involving Strategy Group.
And if you step back and look at why this actually matters to you, the listener, the answer is incredibly direct. Beyond immigration policy or advertising, this is fundamentally about your hard-earned tax dollars. It is about the ongoing struggle to maintain responsible stewardship and transparency in Washington.
It's your money funding the entire apparatus.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to ponder on your own based on Reinhart's themes. We discussed his military experience, where leaders are strictly accountable for every single dollar.
Down to the penny.
Right. So if that non-negotiable standard of absolute accountability is required of a technical sergeant in the Air Force, what would happen to the structure of our government if federal agencies were legally forced to apply that exact same military standard of accountability every single time they issued a non-competitive emergency contract?